The cold November rain drummed steadily against the reinforced windows of the Fort Bragg Special Operations Command building, turning the North Carolina evening into a symphony of water and wind that most people found soothing. For 79-year-old Robert "Bobby" Sullivan, the sound carried different memories. Monsoon rains in distant jungles where the weather could mean the difference between concealment and death. His weathered face, carved deep by decades of Carolina sun and experiences that nobody in this building had ever bothered to ask about, remained focused on his security monitors despite the slight tremor in his hands that came with age. The faded red work shirt he wore daily hung loose on his lean frame, the fabric soft from countless washings and permanently marked by honest sweat stains, paired with blue jeans worn thin at the knees and brown work boots that had lost their shine years ago. His neatly trimmed white beard caught the fluorescent light as he methodically checked access logs with the deliberate precision of a man who took his responsibilities seriously, even if others saw him as nothing more than the old security guard. To the elite operators of 3rd Special Forces Group, Bobby was simply part of the infrastructure, invisible support staff who monitored cameras and checked badges, while real warriors planned missions that would reshape the world in ways civilians would never understand. He'd been working security at the compound for 7 years since his retirement, and the young Green Berets saw him as nothing more than a relic from a different era, telling the same tired stories to anyone polite enough to listen. Master Sergeant Jake "Reaper" Morrison, 32 years old and built like a human weapon, pushed through the main entrance with his A-team, their boots echoing off the polished linoleum after returning from a high-intensity urban warfare exercise. His multicam uniform bore the distinctive flash of special forces, and his presence commanded the kind of respect that came with surviving operations in places that didn't exist on official maps. Around him walked 5 other Green Berets, their conversation low and professional, discussing equipment modifications and tactical improvements with the casual precision of men who lived in the shadows between war and peace. "Evening, Bobby," Morrison said, approaching the security desk where the old man sat surrounded by monitors and access control panels. "How's the night shift treating you? Catch any enemy infiltrators trying to steal our coffee machine?" The comment drew chuckles from his team, their faces showing the kind of casual amusement reserved for harmless entertainment. Bobby looked up from his logbook, steel-gray eyes meeting Morrison's with the calm steadiness that had unnerved better men than these boys. "Evening, Master Sergeant," he replied, his voice a low gravel rumble weathered by decades of use. "Quiet night so far. You boys get good training in today." Staff Sergeant Danny "Ghost" Rodriguez stepped forward, grinning at his team leader with the confidence of youth. "We got plenty of training, Bobby. Pretty sure we could handle anything that comes our way. How about you? Any exciting security incidents? Maybe a suspicious squirrel trying to breach the perimeter?" The laughter was immediate and familiar, echoing through the sterile lobby. Bobby's weathered hands remained steady on his paperwork despite their tremor, his expression unchanged. "Just keeping an eye on things, Sergeant. Making sure the right people get in and the wrong people stay out." He gestured toward the bank of monitors showing various compound entrances and corridors. "Quiet work, but somebody's got to do it." Sergeant First Class Mike Viper Chen leaned against the security desk, his expression shifting toward theatrical interest. "Come on, Bobby, don't be modest. We've all heard your war stories. What was it last time? Something about calling in airstrikes while surrounded by an entire NVA regiment. That's always entertaining." The mockery was sharper now, drawing more attention from other personnel passing through the lobby. The harassment that had started as casual entertainment transformed into something far more malicious, as Morrison's A-team made Bobby's humiliation their evening's prime amusement. Word spread quickly through the compound that the old security guard was spinning another tall tale, and soon a crowd of Special Forces operators had gathered around the security desk like predators sensing weakness. "Listen up, everyone," Morrison announced, his voice carrying through the sterile lobby with practiced authority. "Bobby here was just about to regale us with another epic from his glory days. What was your unit again, old-timer?" "The Fighting Janitors." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez pulled out his phone, framing Bobby in the screen with obvious malicious intent. "This is gold content. Some old rent-a-cop trying to impress actual Green Berets with his fantasy adventures. My followers are gonna eat this up." The laughter grew sharper, meaner, as more operators drifted over to witness what they saw as prime entertainment. Bobby remained calm behind his security desk, his weathered hand steady on the access control panel despite the verbal assault. His steel-gray eyes held that same unsettling depth that had unnerved better men than these boys. The fluorescent lights reflected off his faded red work shirt as he continued his methodical work, checking camera feeds with the deliberate precision that had kept men alive in places these operators couldn't imagine. The breaking point came when Captain David "Blade" Thompson, the team leader, entered the lobby and saw the spectacle. Instead of dispersing his men, he decided to join the entertainment. "What's the commotion, gentlemen?" he asked, his voice carrying the authority of command and the casual cruelty of someone who had never learned to respect his elders. "Sir, our security guard here has been sharing his combat experiences," Morrison explained with theatrical reverence. "Apparently, he was some kind of super soldier back in Vietnam. We're just trying to learn from his vast tactical expertise." The sarcasm was thick enough to cut with a knife. Thompson's eyes lit up with malicious amusement. "Is that so? Well, Bobby, as an actual Special Forces officer, I'm always interested in learning from experienced warriors. What was your MOS? Your unit designation? Or is this just another case of stolen valor from someone who probably never left the wire?" The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a distant battlefield. Bobby's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he maintained his composure. The sound of rain against the windows and cruel laughter began to warp and fade around him, replaced by the distinctive percussion of helicopter rotors and distant artillery. The sterile lobby dissolved into the humid jungle air of Southeast Asia. It was March 1970, and Staff Sergeant Robert "Phantom" Sullivan was crouched in a bomb crater on Hill 937, his car 15 slick with mud and blood. The 5th Special Forces Group had been conducting deep reconnaissance behind enemy lines for 6 days, and the North Vietnamese were closing in with overwhelming numbers. Around him, what remained of his 12-man A-team, kids from Texas and Michigan who'd never seen anything worse than basic training, were running low on ammunition and hope. The radio crackled with desperate calls for extraction, but the LZ was compromised. Enemy mortars walked death across their position, while the jungle canopy blocked helicopter support. Bobby heard the distinctive sound of enemy sappers moving through the undergrowth, preparing for a final assault that would overrun their position. "Contact front," he whispered into his radio, his voice calm despite the chaos. "Estimate company-sized element. Request immediate fire support, danger close." Without waiting for authorization, he began calling in artillery coordinates that would bring high explosives within 50 meters of their own position, a calculated risk that could save them or kill them all. The memory dissolved as quickly as it had come, leaving Bobby sitting in the sterile security lobby, Captain Thompson's face inches from his own. The young officer was still waiting for an answer, his expression twisted with contempt. "Just did my job, Captain," Bobby said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that none of them could understand. "Same as you boys do yours." Captain Thompson's harassment reached a fever pitch as the evening shift change brought waves of Special Forces personnel through the main lobby, transforming what had started as casual mockery into a public tribunal with Bobby as the accused. "Listen up, everyone," Thompson announced, his voice echoing through the sterile space with theatrical authority. Our security expert here has been telling war stories for months, dropping hints about his combat experience. Time for some accountability. I want to see his DD-214, his service records, his medals, or I want him to admit he's been lying to us all. Master Sergeant Morrison stepped forward with renewed malicious energy, feeding off his captain's vindictive momentum. Yeah, what's your real story, Bobby? Supply clerk who never left the wire. Motor pool hero who watched the war from a safe distance. Or did you just buy that Vietnam veteran cap at a surplus store and decide to play pretend for the rest of your life? The crowd of nearly 25 Green Berets laughed and jeered, their phones openly recording what they saw as prime social media content, the exposure of a fraud in their sacred halls. The accusation of stolen valor hung in the air like cordite smoke, sharp and poisonous. Bobby remained steady behind his security desk, his weathered hands continuing their methodical work despite the verbal bombardment. His steel-gray eyes held a depth that seemed to catalog every face in the crowd, every potential threat, every detail that might matter when the situation inevitably escalated. The faded red work shirt stirred slightly in the air conditioning, and for those who knew how to look, his posture held the subtle readiness of a man who had survived more battles than these young warriors could imagine. You know what, Bobby? Thompson continued, his voice dropping into a dangerous whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the lobby. Stolen valor isn't just disrespectful, it's a federal crime. So either prove you're who you've been implying you are, or admit you're a fraud and we'll let base security sort this out. He gestured dramatically toward his A-team. Morrison, Rodriguez, Chen, escort Mr. Sullivan to the records office. Let's get this settled once and for all. From across the lobby, Command Sergeant Major Robert Bull Martinez had been watching the spectacle with a slow-burning rage that threatened to consume his legendary self-control. At 56, with 34 years in special operations, Martinez was a living institution within the regiment, a man whose quiet intensity could silence a room full of operators with a single glance. He had seen countless young officers come and go, some brilliant, some adequate, but rarely had he witnessed such a blatant display of disrespect toward an elder, especially one whose bearing radiated the unmistakable aura of a man who had walked through fire. As Thompson issued his humiliating ultimatum, Martinez studied Bobby with the analytical precision that had kept him alive through decades of classified operations. The way the old man held himself despite his age, shoulders square, weight balanced, ready to move in any direction. The controlled breathing under extreme pressure, the eyes that processed everything while revealing nothing. Most telling was the faint scar tissue around his left temple and the barely visible mark along his forearm where shrapnel had once torn through muscle and bone. The recognition hit Martinez like a physical blow. He'd seen that exact combination of bearing, scars, and unshakable calm before, in a grainy black and white photograph that hung in the group's heritage room. The image showed a small reconnaissance team deep in the Vietnamese jungle, their faces streaked with camouflage paint, standing over captured enemy equipment after a successful raid behind enemy lines. In the center of that photograph, a young soldier with steel-gray eyes and an expression of focused intensity that matched the man now sitting behind the security desk. Martinez pulled out his secure phone with hands that trembled slightly, not from age, but from the magnitude of what he was witnessing. He scrolled to a number he rarely used, the direct line to the group commander. Colonel David Spartan Walker answered on the first ring. "This is Walker." "Sir," Command Sergeant Major Martinez. "I need you in the main lobby of Building 307 immediately. We have a critical situation involving our night security guard, Robert Sullivan, and Captain Thompson's A-team." Martinez's voice was tight with barely controlled emotion. "Sir, I believe Robert Sullivan is Staff Sergeant Robert Phantom Sullivan, misjudged, command and control north. The silence on the other end of the line was immediate and absolute. MACVSOG, Military Assistance Command, Vietnam Studies and Observations Group, was a name that carried almost mythical weight even among Special Forces operators. It was the most classified, most dangerous unit of the Vietnam War, conducting deep reconnaissance and direct action missions behind enemy lines that officially never happened. The men who served with SOG were legends, ghosts who had walked through enemy territory with impunity. "Are you certain, Command Sergeant Major?" Walker's voice had lost all traces of casual conversation, replaced by the sharp focus of a commander facing a crisis. "The scars match the Heritage Room photograph, sir. The bearing, the way he's handling Thompson's harassment without breaking, it's all consistent. Sir, I think we've been letting our operators publicly humiliate a living legend." Martinez paused, watching as Thompson prepared to physically escort Bobby from his post. "And sir, if I'm right about who this man is, what's happening here isn't just disrespectful, it's a desecration." The line went dead as Colonel Walker ended the call, but Martinez could already hear the thunder of boots in distant corridors, the sharp commands of a man who had just learned that one of the most legendary warriors in Special Operations history was sitting in his building, enduring public humiliation from officers who didn't deserve to breathe the same air. Martinez stepped forward, his presence alone causing the crowd of operators to part like water before a battleship. He placed a hand on Thompson's shoulder with the gentle pressure that promised devastating consequences if ignored. "Captain," his voice was a low growl that carried the weight of 3 decades in the shadows, "stand down. Nobody moves, nobody speaks, nobody so much as breathes wrong until the colonel arrives. And Thompson," his grip tightened almost imperceptibly, "you better pray to whatever God you believe in that you're wrong about this man." The recognition chain was now racing through the highest levels of Special Operations Command, carried by men who understood that the name Robert "Phantom" Sullivan represented something sacred in the brotherhood of warriors, and that Captain Thompson had just committed an act of sacrilege that would echo through his career for as long as he lived. The cold November rain intensified against the reinforced windows of Building 307, its rhythmic drumming suddenly overwhelmed by the thunder of approaching vehicles cutting through the North Carolina night. A convoy of 3 black SUVs bearing Special Operations Command plates roared to a synchronized halt outside the main entrance, followed by the group commander's staff car, flying the distinctive pennant that made every soldier on Fort Bragg snap to attention. The vehicle's doors opened in perfect military precision, disgorging a collection of senior officers whose combined presence radiated an authority that could silence an entire Special Operations compound. Colonel David "Spartan" Walker emerged first, his multicam uniform immaculate despite the urgency of his arrival. At 54, Walker was a living legend within the Special Forces community. Lean, gray-haired, with steel blue eyes that had seen too much in too many classified locations around the world. His chest bore ribbons from operations that officially never happened, and his mere presence could make hardened Green Berets question every decision they'd ever made. Behind him stepped the Deputy Group Commander and Command Sergeant Major Martinez, both men radiating the same iron authority that came with decades of managing America's most dangerous warriors. The assembled Green Berets in the lobby snapped to rigid attention as the command element entered, their earlier mockery and laughter dying instantly. Captain Thompson stood frozen in the center of the crowd, his face draining of color as he realized the magnitude of command attention, now focused on his harassment of the old security guard. The phones that had been recording Bobby's humiliation were hastily pocketed, replaced by the cold realization that their casual cruelty had somehow reached the highest levels of Special Operations Command. Colonel Walker's gaze swept the lobby in a single calculated assessment, taking in the cluster of operators, the red-faced captain, the implacable command sergeant major, and finally, the elderly man in the faded red work shirt who sat calmly behind his security desk, weathered hands methodically organizing access logs with the same precision he'd once used to plan missions behind enemy lines. Walker approached directly, ignoring the frozen Thompson entirely, his boots clicking purposefully on the polished linoleum. He stopped directly in front of the security desk, his presence filling the sterile space with an almost palpable energy. The contrast was stark, immaculate military authority facing humble service, but in Walker's eyes, there was only one figure who commanded true respect. "Mr. Sullivan," Walker said, his voice carrying across the silent lobby with resonating authority that seemed to vibrate through the building's foundations. "I need to ask you directly. Are you Staff Sergeant Robert Phantom Sullivan, MACVSOG, Command and Control North, 1969 to 1971? The question hung in the sterile air like smoke from a distant battlefield. Bobby's weathered hand stilled on his logbook, and for a moment something flickered behind his steel-gray eyes, not fear, but the profound weight of memories, of lost friends, of secrets buried deep for over 50 years. He straightened slightly, and despite his age and humble work clothes, his posture held the unmistakable bearing of a man who had once moved through enemy territory like a ghost, leaving only confusion and death in his wake. "Was Colonel," Bobby replied quietly, his gravelly voice carrying a weight that made every green beret in the room lean forward. "Long time ago." Colonel Walker's expression shifted from professional inquiry to something approaching reverence. He drew himself to his full height, his back ramrod straight, and rendered a salute so sharp and precise it seemed to cleave the air itself. "Staff Sergeant Sullivan, it is an honor to have you in my command, sir." Bobby, startled by the gesture from such senior leadership, slowly straightened and returned the salute with the crisp precision of muscle memory that never forgot. The sight of the group commander saluting the old security guard sent shockwaves through the assembled operators, their understanding of reality crashing down around them like artillery fire. Walker held the salute for a long moment before dropping his hand, then turned to face his stunned soldiers. His voice, now edged with barely controlled fury, filled every corner of the lobby. "Gentlemen, you stand in the presence of one of the most legendary warriors in the history of United States Special Operations. Staff Sergeant Robert Phantom Sullivan conducted over 100 classified reconnaissance missions behind enemy lines in Vietnam, operating in areas so dangerous that most of his service record remains sealed to this day." Captain Thompson's face went from pale to ashen gray as the implications crashed over him like a tsunami. The man he'd been calling a fraud, accusing of stolen valor, threatening with arrest. He was a living legend of special operations. "In March 1970, Walker continued, his voice ringing with pride and barely contained rage, then Sergeant Sullivan's 12-man recon team was surrounded by an estimated battalion of North Vietnamese regulars during a classified operation deep in enemy territory. When their extraction was compromised and their radio operator killed in the first volley, Sergeant Sullivan took command of the team's survival. The lobby had grown so quiet that the sound of rain against the windows seemed deafening. Walker's words painted a picture of courage and skill that none of these young operators had ever witnessed firsthand. For 72 hours, while wounded and vastly outnumbered, he conducted a fighting withdrawal through enemy territory, calling in danger-close artillery strikes on his own position to break contact, establishing multiple casualty collection points, and coordinating helicopter extractions under direct fire. His actions saved the lives of 11 American soldiers and resulted in the capture of intelligence that changed the course of operation throughout Southeast Asia. Command Sergeant Major Martinez stepped forward, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, he was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. His call sign, Phantom, was earned through actions that enemy forces still whisper about in their military academies. They put a bounty on his head so high they could have bought a helicopter with it. They never collected because every time they thought they had him cornered, he would vanish, leaving nothing but their own dead behind. Walker's withering gaze fell on Captain Thompson, whose face had gone completely white. "Captain, is it accurate that you accused this decorated war hero of stolen valor? That you publicly humiliated him and threatened him with arrest in front of your subordinates?" Thompson's throat constricted as he tried to find words that wouldn't end his career. "Sir, we didn't know." He never said. "Never said what, Captain?" Walker's voice dropped to a deadly whisper that promised consequences beyond imagination. That he was qualified to share combat experiences. That his decades of classified service might be worth respecting. That maybe, just maybe, a man who survived over 100 missions behind enemy lines might have earned the right to tell his stories without being mocked by officers who have never faced a tenth of what he endured. Walker turned back to Bobby, his expression softening with genuine respect and something approaching guilt. "Staff Sergeant Sullivan, on behalf of this command and every operator who has benefited from the legacy you and men like you built, I apologize for what you've endured tonight. It will not happen again." The rain continued its steady percussion against the windows, but the lobby had been transformed. Where moments before there had been casual arrogance and cruel laughter, now there was only stunned silence and the dawning realization that they had been in the presence of greatness all along. They had simply been too blind to see it. The cold November rain continued its steady percussion against the reinforced windows as Colonel Walker gestured toward the corridor leading to the group's heritage room. "Staff Sergeant Sullivan," he said with profound respect, "these operators need to understand the difference between textbook tactics and battlefield reality. Would you honor us by demonstrating what real reconnaissance leadership looks like?" Bobby rose slowly from his security desk, his weathered hands steady despite their age-related tremor as he straightened his faded red work shirt. The assembled Special Forces operators parted before him like water, their earlier mockery replaced by hushed reverence as they followed the old warrior down the corridor lined with photographs of legendary operations and memorial plaques honoring fallen heroes. The Heritage Room felt like a cathedral as they entered, its walls dominated by a large black and white photograph showing 12 young soldiers in tiger-striped camouflage, standing in a jungle clearing beside captured North Vietnamese equipment. In the center of the group, a lean soldier with steel-gray eyes and an expression of focused intensity held a captured AK-47 with the casual familiarity of someone who had taken it from dead hands. Bobby stopped before the photograph, his steel-gray eyes studying faces only he truly remembered. "Hill 937, March 1970, he said quietly, his gravelly voice filling the reverent silence. "Deep reconnaissance mission, supposedly lightly defended area." He pointed to a tactical map mounted beside the photograph. "Intelligence was wrong. We walked into a battalion-sized ambush here." His weathered finger traced the terrain, with no extraction route and wounded who couldn't move. Captain Thompson stood at the back of the crowd, his face ashen as he watched Bobby transform from humble security guard into tactical instructor. The old man's bearing had subtly shifted, shoulders squared, movements precise, voice carrying the authority of someone who had made life-and-death decisions in the world's most dangerous places. "The key to surviving encirclement," Bobby continued, moving to a detailed topographical map, is creating multiple distractions while establishing casualty collection points here, here, and here. His finger moved with practiced precision. You make noise in 3 directions while moving wounded in the 4th, but that only works if you can coordinate fire support without revealing your actual position. Master Sergeant Morrison, who had been leading the mockery hours earlier, stepped forward with obvious shame and newfound respect. Staff Sergeant, how did you coordinate danger-close artillery while maintaining operational security with a compromised radio? Bobby's weathered face showed the first hint of a smile as he recognized a genuine tactical question. You used the enemy's own positions as reference points, son. Called in strikes on coordinates relative to their muzzle flashes, not our location. Kept them guessing where we actually were while breaking their assault formations. His voice grew more animated as he explained the tactical innovation that had saved his team. 3 days of cat and mouse, moving casualties between strikes until we could establish an LZ they couldn't predict. Colonel Walker watched with profound respect as Bobby demonstrated tactical concepts that were still taught at the Special Warfare Center. This wasn't just storytelling. This was a master class in small unit tactics from someone who had written the book with blood and survival. Bobby reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a worn photograph. The same image from the Heritage Room wall, but this one was personal, creased from decades of handling. This was taken after extraction, he said softly, his voice weighted with memory. Martinez here, he pointed to a young soldier, died in my arms during the helicopter ride. Radio operator from Ohio who loved baseball. Peterson, another face, never walked right again after taking shrapnel. The rest of us carried that jungle home with us. His steel-gray eyes met each Green Beret's gaze. I didn't endure your mockery tonight because I was weak or confused. I endured it because you boys are doing the same job we did, just in different places against different enemies. You've earned your tabs the same way we earned ours, through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. But what you haven't earned yet is the wisdom that comes from burying your mistakes. The silence was profound and humbling. Thompson stepped forward, his voice barely above a whisper. Staff Sergeant Sullivan, I owe you an apology I can never adequately make. What I did was inexcusable. I questioned your honor, your service, your integrity. If you tell Colonel Walker to end my career tonight, I won't argue. Bobby studied the young captain, seeing not the arrogant officer who had tormented him, but another warrior learning hard lessons about leadership and humility. Captain, he said gently, the uniform doesn't make the man makes the uniform. You were trying to protect this place from pretenders. You just forgot that real warriors don't always announce themselves. Colonel Walker stepped forward, his voice carrying absolute authority. What we will do next is ensure this never happens again. Staff Sergeant Sullivan, I'm offering you the position of Group Senior Heritage Advisor. Your primary duty will be teaching our operators the lessons that can't be learned from manuals, the wisdom that comes from walking through fire and bringing others home. Bobby considered for a moment, then nodded slowly. I'd be honored, Colonel, but I still want to keep my security desk. A man needs to feel useful, and watching the gates, making sure the right people get in, that's important work too. The transformation that followed was gradual but profound. Thompson, facing career-ending consequences, was reassigned to the training cadre, where he spent months learning humility from combat veterans who taught him the difference between confidence and arrogance. His A-team, initially resistant, gradually understood that their casual cruelty had revealed more about their character than Bobby's humble service ever could. Within weeks, a new tradition emerged at Building 307. Every Friday evening, Special Forces operators would gather in the Heritage Room as Bobby, still wearing his faded red work shirt and worn boots, shared stories not of personal glory, but of young men facing impossible odds with nothing but their training and each other. He spoke of Martinez, the radio operator who sang Motown to keep from breaking, and Peterson, the young lieutenant who admitted he was scared and lived because he listened. The compound, once filled with casual disrespect toward the old security guard, now resonated with respectful greetings of "Good evening, Staff Sergeant," and the understanding that the greatest warriors often walk among us in work clothes, asking for nothing more than the chance to honor the memory of better men than themselves. Morrison became Bobby's most dedicated student, learning that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite being terrified. The phone videos of Bobby's humiliation were deleted, replaced by respectful documentation of heritage sessions that would educate future generations of operators about the true cost of freedom. 6 months later, during a pre-deployment briefing, a young captain fresh from the Q course noticed Bobby sitting quietly at the back of the room. "Sir," he asked Colonel Walker, "why is the security guard in our classified briefing?" The room fell silent. Every veteran of that November night turned to stare at the young officer with expressions of disbelief. Walker smiled grimly. "Because, Captain, before any of us were here, men like him were doing this job with less equipment, less support, and no safety net. And because everyone in this building, from the newest private to me, serves in the shadow of what men like him already paid for in blood." After the briefing, the young captain found his way to the Heritage Room, where Bobby sat alone, looking at the old MACVSOG photograph. "Staff Sergeant Sullivan," he asked quietly, "Sir, could you tell me about that mission?" Bobby looked at him, then at the Distinguished Service Cross in the display case, and finally back to the captain. He patted the bench beside him. "Sit down, son," he said. "It's not really my story, it's theirs, but I'll tell you what I remember." And in that quiet room, as rain resumed its steady rhythm against the Fort Bragg windows, another link was forged in a chain stretching back through the jungle, through the fire, through the ghosts. A chain of men who understood that real valor doesn't shout. It endures, humbly, in faded red shirts and silent hallways, waiting for someone worthy to ask the right questions and listen to the answers that keep the next generation alive. Bobby Sullivan continued his quiet service, but now he worked among warriors who understood that legends don't always live in books or display cases. Sometimes they sit behind security desks, checking access logs and monitoring cameras, carrying a lifetime of classified experiences and the profound responsibility of keeping faith with those who trusted their lives to his leadership and never made it home to tell their own stories. The call sign, Phantom, lived on, not in the sterile pages of military history, but in the humble service of an old man who still moved through shadows of memory,